live, man.
We live?
You live.
Why is that fucking screen black? I feel like I don't know how I feel.
Hey, something wrong with the black?
I don't know. There's nothing wrong with the black. I love you, man. So anyway, I'm super excited about today. This is one of like the more exciting podcasts we've done. This is a guy I really kind of admired from afar, and I got to go back and forth a little bit with Nick and spend some time kind of picking his brain and talking to him. And I kind of really look for mentorship or advice in a lot of different places, and especially with my jiu-jitsu. You know, it's fun to come across these guys that are answering the questions you're almost afraid to ask sometimes, and you're afraid to ask your instructor or your trainer for a number of reasons. And I'm really excited to have Nick on from ChewJitsu. He is a wealth of knowledge, and especially at answering the questions I'm afraid to ask my black belts. What's going on, Nick? So I'm excited to have you, and I want to get your thoughts on kind of how you got to this point and how you became a mentor to so many jiu-jitsu practitioners out there. Like, where does this all start, and how the fuck do you start, like, doing this YouTube, doing this channel where you're just like, I'm going to answer the simple questions?
Huh. So are you asking, like, how I got started in jiu-jitsu or how I got started?
We're going to get to how you started in jiu-jitsu. Actually, start with how you started in jiu-jitsu. Start there.
Okay, so jiu-jitsu I got started in that because I was wrestling in high school, and you know, as a kid, I grew up watching UFC and Bloodsport and everything like the rest of everyone. And when I was wrestling, when I got out of it, towards the end of it, I realized that there was not a lot of colleges that had wrestling. The college that I was going to go to didn't have wrestling, and I still wanted to do it. And I started looking at the UFC and seeing how that was kind of, you know, it looked interesting, and I thought I wanted to fight at some point. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to fight MMA, I need to know how to, like, finish people when I take them down with the wrestling. And so I started looking up jiu-jitsu schools, got into it when I was still in high school, and then just kept going on from there.
Crazy. And you know,
that's the condensed version.
How long did it take you to reach a level where you were like, I kind of know what I'm doing?
Well, I think it depends on, you know, what your thinking is, because like when you're newer, right, you don't know a lot, and so as soon as you start to figure something out, like when I was a blue belt, I thought I had a good idea as to what I was doing, but it's one of those things where the more and the deeper you get into it and the more you learn, the more you realize, like, you don't know shit, you know, like you're constantly just taking in more.
It's a crazy sport like that, and it's a lot of fun. And you came in from the wrestling side, so you had a leg up on everybody. Anytime you can come into it with some high level grappling experience, and I consider high school some pretty decent level. You know, you're out there doing it every day. You kind of have a leg up on everybody that hits the mats. You know, so you know, for me, you know, watching you from afar, I really enjoyed watching how you take the time with a lot of folks to answer these simple questions. Where does that come from? Because it's a unique way of using the platform, YouTube and Instagram. It's almost like mentorship from afar. How does that start to come about?
Well, so I started making videos on YouTube originally because it started off as a sort of a thing to like help my students out, because I was posting up videos that we were doing, you know, techniques that we were doing during the week. And then I started putting up drill videos where I was showing different drills that I was working on. And I did those because my students would come in for, quote, a drill class. Like they would say, hey, like, you know, we have a private Facebook group. They'd message some of the guys and say, hey, let's get together and do some drills. Well, their drilling classes would turn into them kind of talking for a few minutes, then just rolling for the rest of the time. And there's a real value to drilling. And so I, you know, put the moves together and was like, here, if you don't know what to do, just do these techniques, just drill this. And then somewhere along the line, I started getting like just questions, just people asking random questions. And it was the same kinds of questions that I would get from my students a lot of times, like new guys that are in the gym. And it's not always like brand new guys. It's different guys at varying levels. But basically, it's the same questions I was getting, you know, outside of or, you know, in the gym. And then I was getting them from online. And then one of my students, he said it just in passing, and this was, I think, one of the more like, okay, I think I'll go ahead and try to do this. We were talking to each other in a Whole Foods of all places, and he says, man, you should start doing some videos, like, you know. And then we were talking about it, and I was thinking about how I'll go on these rants, in the gym about random stuff.
Right.
And, you know, I'll have the guy, it's not like they're running away as soon as I start talking. I mean, they kind of hang out and kind of encourage it. So I was like, okay, I'll try doing the videos. And then I started looking on YouTube and just sort of realized that there's tons of guys doing similar things. And so I was like, well, it's always weird to put yourself out there like that. But I was like, there's other people doing it. So I'll just put my own spin on things and share my experiences with people.
Yeah. I mean, it's really unique in the sense that, you know, you go to any training, any gym, and you start maybe Muay Thai, or you start Jiu-Jitsu, or you start this different path. And we all have those questions. But when you're in the gi or the no gi and you're lined up on the line and it's all formal, and then most gyms are more formal than others. You know, like I said, I came up in SBG, super formal, and then I went to 10P, which is just every fucking guy everywhere. You know, it's different animals. But you have a lot of questions. You have so many questions, like, what does it take to get a blue belt? How long do I have to train? How much drilling is enough? You know, all these different things kind of go around in your head. And you're even answering the simple things like, how much garbage food should I eat? How should my diet be? I feel, and I feel like you're answering the questions every guy has, but there's not a lot of jiu-jitsu knowledge on the internet. That's why I think the Gracie University and what Henner and those guys are doing, they're killing the game, because there was no one else in that space. I mean, there's not even, and I've had this talk with Katzengano, there's not even a female out there pumping out a lot of content on YouTube. And I used to talk to my ex about it, who was a black belt, Leah Taylor. There's just not a lot of female stuff to chew on out there. You're doing, no pun intended, what you're doing is awesome and unique, in the content that you're putting out there answers a lot of the basic questions. I've watched, and I can't say this about a lot of people, and I'm sure you can't, I've watched 10 to 15 of your videos because they answered simple questions that I had about going to the gym, and just random questions like, I changed gyms, should I fight for my belt? Things like that.
Right.
What are some of the crazier questions you get from folks that maybe don't make it on air, or what are some of the questions that you feel gym owners need to do, or black belts need to do a better job answering? I guess there are two questions.
Crazy questions. That's such a hard one, because I've gotten some really crazy questions that sometimes really what it comes down to is I have to look at it like, when I get a question, and I'm not going to answer it if I don't feel like I have something to give. So if I get a question and I either have an experience or maybe just an idea or something that I think could be useful for the person, I'll try to share my experience. And I don't even like to use the word answer, because I'm answering the question, yes, but like, I'm not giving them the right answer. I'm just giving them an answer, just something for them to take. And then ultimately they got to take that in for themselves and sort of make their own sort of use of it. Right. Just like a technique, right? You take a technique from your coach, you take it in, you make it your own, you kind of make your own stew, and then you do something with it. It's the same thing. As far as the questions go, I mean, I've been asked stuff like crazy stuff, like, honestly, I can't think, like, there's so many of them that they've just kind of jumbled together, and I can't think of them offhand. And as far as black belt coach, like owners and things like that, what was the question again?
Yeah, what are some of the things you feel like they're not answering? Like, do you get a lot of reoccurring ones that you feel that the black belt's got to do a better job answering for their students? Because I have some, I can tell you.
The thing that I think, because, even my gym's, like you were talking about formal versus informal. My gym's pretty informal. I run it similar to my old wrestling practice, where we come in, we bullshit with each other. We have a good time. We chat and then we just talk about whatever. We train hard. And then probably the most formal thing is at the end of class, we bow out towards another and shake hands and stuff. But one of the things that I would say, I've experienced this from people that have come to my gym from other gyms, and my students that I have now, is make sure that and you have to do this, and you have to reiterate this over and over again, because almost to the point where you feel annoyed that you're telling people, but just let people know that the door is open if they have questions. A lot of times when people are in a sort of a junior position, they don't want to reach out to ask questions because they don't want to feel like they're being stupid or asking dumb questions. Or sometimes, I've seen this from people that came from more formal gyms. A lot of times they felt like that their coach was not like talking to them as like a human being and asking them the question wasn't really on the table. And so one of the things that I do with my guys is, after every class, I always huddle everybody up. And I'll basically start asking, you guys got any questions? And then on top of that, and that's usually technical related, but I also make sure that the door is, abundantly, it's abundantly open to them, right? So like a lot of my students who will have these sort of more, I would say, like, not so much technical related, but like sort of like the social dynamic, the culture type stuff, just stuff that comes up, in your head. They'll send me a Facebook message or a text or whatever, and they'll ask that question to try to get some sort of answer. And so I think it's one of those things where if your job is to serve those people that are inside your gym, which mine is, then you got to make sure that you're open to those people, and they got to know it too, because again, a lot of times they don't want to step out of bounds, and they feel kind of awkward asking questions. So making sure that it's painfully obvious that you're there to help them if they need something.
I think part of it and I want to get your thoughts. And Q will have thoughts on this. He played ball in college, and I played ball. You grow up with coaching styles. So whether you played t-ball or wrestling or whatever, you grow up with coaching styles, and that's what you have to reflect on when you hit the mats as an older adult. You come up with either that coach that's a real rah-rah guy. He's very like, we got to go get it and let's go. And, that's great. That's great for competitors. That speaks to them. And then there's a lot of people, and what's unique about mixed martial arts, ChewJitsu, whatever it is you get into, some guys are doing it just for the therapeutic reasons, just to have a good time, to get out, to have fun. So like the rah-rah guys, maybe they don't respond as well to those. They respond a little bit better to more. Like I go more because for me, it's like yoga with chokes. Like I'm going and I'm trying to do some cool stuff, have fun, the camaraderie, get out 2-3 nights a week. Like I had to sit down with my coach, Coach Casey Halstead, and I had to say, Case, I don't come to this because I think I'm going to get in like a UFC ring and get fucked up. I'm coming to this because I'm just trying to enjoy myself, enjoy the sport, support the guys, be around it. I'm 38 years old. You know what I mean? I'm not fooling anybody. There's guys that are 6 months in that take a run at me, and I've been at it a lot longer than that. It's one of those things. It's all in the coaching style you respond to. So reflecting on your past, I know Q was like this. We had football coaches. We had people. There were dumb questions. There were, so you couldn't, you just had to listen and pay attention. It was always shut up and pay attention. Now, I think, when you step on the mat, it's important, like you said, to reiterate, hey, there's no dumb questions, guys. Don't hesitate to ask, because there are a lot of holes. And I think for younger guys coming into the sport, they have a lot of questions. I liked the SBG model when I started there, where you got like that full-blown consultation, kind of that whole approach, that sales system. And it gave you, that Lloyd Irvin system where you kind of, learned every step of the way. There's some benefits to that. And I do like the open architecture system too. But I felt a lot of the questions you're answering are questions that black belts and coaches need to do a bit better job kind of guiding their students, like, hey, this is a typical track that a guy goes on here at this gym. This is a typical, growth system. If what do you think your commitment will be? Hey, 2 days a week. Okay, at 2 days a week in one open mat, this is how fast it'll probably take you to progress and to reach a proficient level. Yeah, if you're coming 4 or 5 days a week and you're on a comp team or something like that, it's going to be a little quicker, and we'll be able to accelerate you. But for the average guy that works a full-time job, because you always have to have that balance in a gym, Nick, right? You have to have some of the doctors and dentists, but then you have your competitors, right? You got to have those that can actually pay the bills when they're due. And
right. It depends on what you're running it for. I know guys that run gyms, and like, I don't, they're basically these like,
factories,
very, very small gyms. Yeah. And they run very, very small gyms, and all they do is competitors. I know guys that have these big gyms, and for students have left those gyms and come to mine before, where they tell me that they feel like that as soon as they walk in, there's like a dollar sign hanging over them. And so I think if you want to run, a good business, and this is the way that I look at it, if you want to run a good business, but at the same time, you do want to make some impact, you have to kind of like play this balancing act, because you got to keep the lights on, because
right.
Otherwise you can't serve people. But at the same time, you can't go so far towards the other end where, you're not developing a relationship with the people, but at the same time, you can't go the other end where basically you don't draw any boundaries, and then people just kind of walk all over you. So you got to straddle that line.
Yeah, you don't want to be a garage in Fight Club, and you don't want to be, too over the top that, like you said, it's dollar signs hanging. Let me ask you, let's cut right into the meat. What are some of the good gyms out there? Like which ones do you look at and you're like, they're getting it right? Like ATT, what are some of the ones you like? And I know you're going to be political. All the guys are on the show. What are some of the ones you look at and you're like, fuck, man, I don't even know how they stay in business?
Man, I'm I'll name a few that I see that I've enjoyed or that I've seen or whatever. But I tend not to focus too much on everybody else, because then I kind of lose sight of what I'm doing. Obviously, like there's gyms like in the jiu-jitsu space, as far as competitors go, you have gyms like Atos, which is just like, I mean, I've been a fan of Andre's for a long time. You know, those guys are just killing it. I mean, they're just winning all kinds of stuff. You've obviously got guys like Renzo Gracie that, you know, from what I understand, I've never actually been up there, but I've met several people. But Renzo Gracie's gym up in New York, right? You have those killers like the guys that train under Danaher.
Killers.
But then you also have just a massive gym that's obviously supporting hundreds and hundreds of people that aren't, you know, the Danaher Death Squad. So obviously they've got something good going on.
I've heard rumors about that gym, Nick, that there's like accountants in there that are fucking snapping people's heads off.
I believe it.
I got homies.
Well, you know, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying I got homies in the Renzo system, like Ruben Alvarez, certain guys, and I've heard rumors that, like you said, guys not in. That's why, you know, we've debated this. That Renzo gym up in New York. Not to get off on a tangent, I've heard rumors that there's guys in there that are like fucking bicycle messengers that like never competed, but they're just like animals.
Well, no, I mean, to me, like when you watch. Like when you see a competitor come out to the mat or something like that, that guy is only a product of all the other guys he's training with. And so usually speaking, like if you've got some good guys in the mat, like if you have some good competitors, it's like the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, you got these good competitors, but there's probably this deep well of really tough dudes that just don't want to compete. You know, they're plenty like aggressive, they're skilled or whatever, but maybe they just don't want to compete and do it. You know, I mean, like there's plenty of guys in my gym who give me more trouble sometimes than the black belts that I roll against in competition. But they just don't want to compete. It's not their thing. Like you said, they're maybe getting near 40 or in their mid 30s. They've got a lot of stuff going on. They do jiu-jitsu as sort of their outlet and to sort of dump the energy in. And if they turn it into a competitive thing, then it kind of makes it into something where it's no longer their escape. Now they've got to like turn it on and they have to be on all the time.
It becomes work. Yeah,
it does. And then as far as going back to the thing about how they stay in business, you know, I don't know, man. Like, you know, because usually like I feel like, you know, I haven't really seen a lot of gyms like that I've been into personally where I'm like, I don't know how they're keeping the lights on. Every now and then it happens, but usually you can kind of walk into a gym sometimes and kind of see like what's going on, and you can see maybe that they're just getting by and they're just getting, you know, paying the bills off or whatever. But I haven't been into too many gyms where I was kind of like, man, what are you guys doing? And that said, I haven't traveled as much to all these other gyms because I'm in Kentucky, so there's, you know, I'm in the middle of the country, so I'm not always in California, I'm not always in Florida or in New York or wherever. So
has the Gracie name, in your opinion, this is what comes up, like guys dance around the whole like, well, that's a McDojo. I think the Gracie gym name, other than like the Renzo, certain brands, they've been a little bastardized. I think that's fair to say. I think, you know, every 4 blocks, you know, there's somebody that's like, this is a Gracie Annex. This is a Gracie this, you know. And I feel like that's been beat to death now. And you have to be a little careful and track the lineage. Am I correct in saying that? Fair in saying that?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends on like because there's two, like, I mean, there's several branches of obviously the Gracie family that use that name. You have like, you know, the Gracies from, you know, Torrance and things like that, right? Like that focus more on the self-defense aspect. You've got like Gracie Baja, which obviously is, you know, this powerhouse as far as opening up gyms. You've got then you've got all these other Gracie lineage, you know, gyms, like you said, that'll have Gracie this, Gracie that, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, you always got to if you're going to join a gym, you need to do a little bit of due diligence and see what's going on and kind of see what's happening there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that the name's been bastardized so much, but it's definitely used a lot more now than it used to be. So it doesn't maybe pack the same punch that it used to.
Now, recently, you're familiar with Superfoot Wallace, Bill. You know,
yeah,
and he came out with a piece on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen it. It was interesting. He said that the Gracies were super, super smart, and they stacked the deck in the original UFCs to where jiu-jitsu had to win and had to become the prominent mixed martial art. And he likens that to them having the boom that they've had, because obviously Superfoot comes from a different background. Even though he respects jiu-jitsu, if you Google it, Bill Superfoot Wallace, he has a piece that he talks about that. He goes, go look at all the fighters in the original 2 UFCs. He said the deck was stacked that jiu-jitsu had to win. He's like, there was a sumo wrestler in there. There was a boxer that broke his hand in one of the on the sumo wrestler, I believe. He's like, there was a barroom bouncer or something in one of them.
Yeah.
He goes, go look, and the deck was stacked for jiu-jitsu to win. Is because and I'm sure you do. UFC 1 and 2 established jiu-jitsu and led to the jiu-jitsu boom that we see right now, because everybody talks about the jiu-jitsu bubble. When will it burst?
Yeah.
Do you feel that way, or do you feel like, well, it was an open invitation, everybody could come, or did they stack the deck a little bit?
Yes and no. I definitely think that they stacked the deck a bit. I mean, they're smart. I mean, it was they had this system that obviously they had taken tons and tons of challenges in their garages and stuff like that, and they put their money where their mouth is. There's no doubt about that. But when they're putting a thing together, obviously they wanted to shake up things and basically prove like, hey, we know what we're doing. And so they went in there and they had a lot of strikers. They're like a lot of these guys, and some of these guys you look at them and you're like, this guy. I don't know the pool of talent that they had to choose from, but obviously, like some of these guys were not in the best shape. Although there was a funny book back in the day called The Evolution of NHB. It was like I got it back when I was in high school when I was getting into MMA, and they were talking about that whole process. Like Zane Frazier, he was like he was like one of the karate guys. He had gotten into a fight with Frank Dukes, and then like I think it was like whoever was helping run, Bob Mirowitz or whatever, he was like, no, we got to get the guy that beat up Frank Dukes. And then there was the karate guy that he fought, the big, like sort of overweight guy. When he was fighting him, or when they were doing the resumes or whatever, he had sent this really in shape picture of himself. And then he gets there and he's got a beer gut and you're like, who the hell is this guy? So in some cases you got to cut him some slack, but obviously I think they tried to put it in a situation where obviously the fights would be tough, but at the same time, jiu-jitsu would come out on top. I don't think that's, that hard saying, but it was smart. And I'm thankful that they did it because it exposed a lot of people. And then, later on, you had a lot of other jiu-jitsu guys come out and then, do the same thing. But from what I understand, I don't know. I wonder when I felt like I read somewhere that Mark Coleman was had been trying to get in there from the beginning or something. And that dude was a monster. And I think that if Mark Coleman had gotten into one of the early UFCs, things may have been a little bit different. But regardless of whether or not they stacked the deck, I'm glad that they did it because, again, it exposed so many people, millions of people to this martial art that is really effective, regardless of whether or not the deck was stacked one way or the other.
What is the and there's so many directions I want to go in with you, but what is the best martial art in your opinion? Is it it's going to come down to Muay Thai and BJJ. It's going to be somewhere in there.
Well, it depends on what you're doing it for. I mean, it really does. Like, so I used to be, when I was a young kid, like when I first got into jiu-jitsu, as a lot of people do, right? Like in anything, we like champion this thing that we're doing. And so we instantly identify with us being this guy. So like, you would see this with CrossFitters where they do CrossFit for like a couple months and then they won't stop talking about it. Well, I was that jiu-jitsu guy who got into it. And for the first couple of years, I was all other martial arts suck. Jiu-jitsu is the best, that whatever. As I got older, though, I kind of realized that, well, maybe that's not true, because obviously if you jiu-jitsu is great for grappling, right? But, you need wrestling. I think wrestling's a really beneficial thing. I fought mixed martial arts and I see the value in striking. So I think you should do some striking, boxing, Muay Thai, some sort of striking. If you're someone that, is going to be using their weapon a lot, right? Like, well, then you need to train with that weapon more. It shouldn't be something, well, I do my jiu-jitsu and then I never train with my weapon. You should definitely train with your weapon. And hell, I mean, there's guys that practice other martial arts that really just do it because they enjoy that martial art. There's guys that do like, Taekwondo and stuff, and they enjoy doing their these high kicks and stuff like that. Hell, I have a guy that just fought recently. Now he's been boxing and doing some other kickboxing and Muay Thai, but he started in Taekwondo and he can do all those crazy kicks in the fights and stuff. So I don't know. I think it depends on what you're trying to do with everything. You want to be realistic with it. Like if you're trying to be a mixed martial arts fighter or you're training specifically for self-defense, then there obviously are some martial arts that are, necessary for you, I think. But at the same time, if you're not worried about those situations, if you're not trying to be a mixed martial arts fighter, if you don't want to do grappling competitions or whatever, well, then you can go do some of the other martial arts, even though they may not be as, one-on-one effective. Maybe you just enjoy doing them, and that's perfectly fine.
The best explanation I heard, and it's a great one, and I think, McDojo Life gave it to me, and it was a great way to explain it, and I should have picked up on it a lot longer coming from the gun community. Is if you're looking at it from a pure defense outlook, it should all be about managing distance. and what your comfort level is with managing that distance. And if you think about it, you look at some of the great distance managers like John Jones, even Evander Holyfield through the years, you know, in boxing. It is all about managing distance, and you should maybe train a little bit more in an area where you're comfortable at that distance. You know, if you're comfortable and standing and working from that distance, practice a lot working using that distance and using the tools that you have to manage that distance. If it's purely self-defense and maybe you can't do martial arts, maybe, and again, maybe you have certain asthmas, maybe you have certain limitations, all you can use is a gun. You should train with that tool, and that should be a tool that you train. Maybe it's a blade. You should do some blade work, blade combatives. Maybe leg kicks are your thing. You have long legs like John Jones, and you manage distance that way. But it should all come down to distance management. If you don't want to go to the ground, prevent yourself from going to the ground by managing that distance, and practice a lot of technical get-ups and maneuvering through get-ups, and don't go to the ground. I think one of the drawbacks of jiu-jitsu and self-defense, and I've had this talk with Ruben, who's a good friend of mine, a black belt, Ruben Alvarez, is tackling. Tackling becomes like your first thing. You want to tackle and sometimes get to the ground. If that's the area of your expertise, you want to get to the ground or you want to tackle somebody. That's a little bit of a drawback of sometimes that jiu-jitsu mindset or being fixated in that space. Now, it all comes down to, I think, the explanation of distance management and how you interpret distance, in my opinion. What do you say to that? I could be wrong. I mean, I'm no expert.
So your question is, like, with martial arts, it comes down to purely distance management?
Well, self-defense as it relates to martial arts and choosing that art. I think everybody has a comfort level. Like when somebody says to me, geez, John, I want to buy a gun. Where should I put it in the house? I go, where do you feel the most comfortable? That's where I start. Because that's where you're going to go when you hear this at the door, Nick.
Sure.
When you hear that at the door, what does every woman do? They freeze in the kitchen because they don't want to get the door, right? So I always say, stage a revolver in the kitchen. And they say, well, why do you say a revolver? I say, because there's a lot of redeeming qualities to a revolver. If you're a woman who's never trained a day in her life, right, on a gun, what do you think, or trained in any type of martial art, what's going to happen if a strong male comes in the house? They're probably going to overtake them or probably be on top of them or probably grab them. What can you do with a revolver that you can't do with a Glock? You can press it right up against their fucking head and pull the trigger. It's not going to come out of battery. It's going to work. It's going to go boom almost every time. So there are redeeming qualities to that type of self-defense. And they say, well, why'd you pick the kitchen? I go, I didn't. The person said that's where they feel the most comfortable. So when you hear that pounding at the door, most women freeze right around the fridge or in the kitchen. And I always say maybe stage one in the bathroom, because that's going to be a place you're going to go and hide. People instantly think the bed, or the bedroom, it's not always the bedroom. So, every self-defense scenario, however you paint the picture, whether in a UFC ring or in life, it's going to be about distance. Why do they say every altercation is going to happen in about 3 feet with, it's going to be over and under 3 minutes, and it's going to involve probably 3 acts, you know what I mean? Whether it's the takedown, the strike, the choke, whatever, it is. So you have to start to think in terms of that. So when people ask me, where's the best place to put a gun in the house? I say, where do you feel the most comfortable? That's usually where I start.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about it like that. But as far as like the guns, but as far as fight goes and self-defense, it's absolutely obviously going to come down to controlling the distance and being able to dictate that, whether you want to get out of there or if you want to proceed and get really close. And I mean, obviously, in most situations, I think that honestly, I'll say it like this: if you're training for self-defense, don't kid yourself. Like, you should do like striking as well. Like, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu guys that are saying I'm training for self-defense, and I see them that they've never actually done striking. I'm like, well, how are you training self-defense? Like, what happens if someone throws a punch? I've even seen like some self-defense schools where they throw these like little pitter-patter punches. I'm like, that's bullshit. Like, because what's going to happen is one day some guy's actually going to punch you if you're actually in a self-defense situation, and you're going to have the real feeling of being hit. It's not fun. Your body freaks out most of the time for the first time. After a while, you can kind of get used to it if you understand how to defend it and roll with it. But the first time you get hit with a real hard punch, freaks your body out. You're not used to it. And so I see people like pitter-patter punching, and through going for their jiu-jitsu techniques. And I'm like, this is garbage. Like, you're not – I mean, to me, when it comes down to it, like, distance management, of course, is important, but also the, stress inoculation, being able to deal with stress. That's really important because, you can you can have all the cool techniques that you want, but if you've never actually done them in any sort of live conditions, well, then good luck. Because as soon as someone puts themselves on you, it's like, great. Like, you know, there's people that I'll hear, they'll say, well, I'm going to go buy a gun for self-defense. I'm like, well, you better train with the gun, because if you don't actually train with it, good luck using it when someone's actually coming at you, because it's not as simple as just like, you're nice and calm and relaxed and there you go. It's like, you should do work with that weapon, that tool. And so, you know, these techniques that we have, these skills that we have, they're just tools. But I think it's really important to obviously be able to control the fight or the situation from any distance. And then at the same time, you need to be doing those techniques in some fashion of realism. This is what separates, you know, the combat sports from, say, the traditional counterparts, right? Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, all these sports, these martial arts, everything's done with some sort of realism. There's some sort of live sparring. Now, I'm not saying you have to go get your friggin' face caved in with punches, but you should have some stress put on you through, you know, live sparring, where it makes your body freak out a little bit. So this way, when someone, let's say if you're in a situation where you've got to protect your family or yourself out in the street, it's not the first time it happens, because you're going to have a rude awakening then, you know?
Oh, you have to, you have to stress yourself out. I mean, that's been a big hallmark of the training I've done with Tony at Real World Tactical, the guys through the years, Dom Rosso, who's a former SEAL. You have to stress your body out. When you train on a firearm, and you're out in South Florida and you're running around the range and you're training in the heat and in the elements, I always say, they use the term float the dot, take the shot. You're going to get a little wobbly. You're going to get a little shaky. You have to practice and put your body through that. And your body's going to have what they call like a natural rhythm to it. And you have to understand the rhythm under all those stresses and how the adrenaline dump is going to occur. And if you don't do that, you're doing yourself a tremendous disservice. It's the same thing in jiu-jitsu, and it's the same thing in every other type of mixed martial art. You have to get punched in the face once, right? You have to kind of understand how that feeling is. And, you know, we can make all the jokes we want about every fighter has a plan until they get punched in the face, but you should get choked out at least once. I believe that. You should understand how far you can go and how you can defend yourself. And you have to put yourself in that mental headspace of like, okay, here's my limitations. Here's what I can do when somebody's on top of me and they're bigger than me. That's why it's great to roll with guys smaller that can defeat you. It's great to train with guys bigger than you that can beat you. And it's great to, you know, kind of understand all aspects of that and get a little better at dealing with each type of person and body type in every situation. Yes, it's hard to go out there and train with a gun all the time. It's hard to train with a blade all the time. You know, you have to kind of learn to do things at home and create your own self-stress. You know, I say, like, whether that's dry fire, whether that's using a block of wood to practice blade techniques. You have to have the ability to kind of create your own stress too at home. And on the mat, on, you know, open mats, it gets good to sometimes have that roll that's a hard roll and understand, okay, these are my limitations. I think, you know, we're in a generation, Nick, and I want to get your take on this, where, in plain English, not enough people get choked out. I mean, that's the honest answer I can give. Do you feel when you're dealing with new guys coming into the gym that you got to kind of break them of that? And I think that's a natural progression of jiu-jitsu and fighting. But I think, you know, have you ever had a guy like, they're just like, you know what, this isn't for me? You know what I mean? Like, I just can't take it, the stress.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely people that come in that they think it's not for them. And I think a lot of times, a lot of these people haven't pushed through anything physically, like to the point where they get past it, because there's a certain point with anything physical where, you know, like a wrestling or jiu-jitsu or any of these sports, or really any skill for that matter, but you push through it, and then there's this fun part afterwards, but you have to get used to pushing through that. And a lot of people haven't done that. You know, I haven't noticed it as much from my adults. My adults are like, all the guys that come in there are generally pretty down for the grind. And luckily, with all the videos that I do now, they kind of have a better idea as to what to expect when they get in. So they're ready for it. But one thing I'll say is that I've noticed is that with our kids that come in, like, kids are much less physical these days. Like, you know, and this is just from the time I started teaching kids martial arts back in 2009. So just within 10 years, I've noticed this degrading of their physical abilities, and even their imaginations. It's just like the kids have, like, they've become these little vegetables that play iPad all day long. And so they don't, like, exercise as much. They don't go out and, like, And the media has like gotten everybody so friggin' afraid that like these kids can't even go outside and ride a bike. Like I remember when I was a kid, like our parents would kick us out and say, go play outside. Like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I don't know, go play outside. But it doesn't happen anymore because kids will just FaceTime their buddies. And parents won't even let their kids go outside because they're too clingy. And they're saying the world's terrible out there. I'm like, the world's not terrible. It's like, it's in your face more now. And so I think that, you see these kids where they don't go out and fall and break their arm because they climbed up a tree. They don't bump their heads and do all this stuff that I used to see. And I feel like that's where I'm seeing the biggest change is where these kids they're not rough like they used to be. And this is not, I'm generalizing here, of course, but that's where I see more of, an issue where I see that like a lot of the kids come in, they're just not used to being rough. And one of the things that like I talk to my kids coaches is part of our job with the kids first is not even to teach them jiu-jitsu. It's just to make them tough. Like, hey, okay, we got to get these kids used to like taking falls and like doing strenuous exercises and doing these things so they get used to this stuff. And then we can actually teach them jiu-jitsu because jiu-jitsu is going to be tough. So, but the adults that usually come in are usually generally pretty old.
People in general, Nick, they're not humbled enough. There's not enough of a humbling. I got into jiu-jitsu, and I got to tell you, it's one of the best things for somebody with an ego because it'll humble you every fucking time. Every day you'll get humbled. And I just think in general, people need to be humbled more. And I think people get kind of high on the Haman, so to speak, and they get to a point in life where, they're just happy throwing the barbecue on, and that's great. But I think you have to have that. And I think at a young age, a lot of that's getting lost. It's getting lost in the trophy culture. It's getting lost in the I guess I'll say it, the pussification of things. And I think people need to kind of understand, listen, it's okay to lose. It's okay to have a setback. It's okay to have a little dirt rubbed in your face. It's okay to hit the sled and the sled not move. You need to kind of understand that it's not going to be easy. And that's part of the reason why you get so many people that are like, I lost and I'm going to take my ball and go home. And that's not how life works. It'll beat you and beat you. And I know it's old cliche, but that's one of the beautiful things about training and about getting into something like jiu-jitsu and getting into something like mixed martial arts is it'll humble you every time. No matter how good you are, there's somebody out there better. And there's someone out there training harder and training more. And, of course, yes, we reach limitations in life, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's the ability to get to the mats, 6, 7, 8 times, 10 times a week. You can't do it. And you reach physical limitations with age. That's just part of it. Not everybody's Tom Brady. And that's just part of the game. But I think there's just not enough of that. And I wanted to touch on that because I just, I see it, you as a mentor being where you are and doing what you're doing. I think it's good to have dirt rubbed in your face once in a while.
Well, it is. And, the thing is, it's like, I think in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times it gets misused. They'll say, you've got like this ego, whatever. Everybody's got an ego. We all have one. If you don't have an ego, you can't you don't know what to make of anything. It's your construction of yourself. But I think jiu-jitsu in any of the combat sports, they do this thing where if your ego's not steeped in reality, right? So sometimes let's say that you have an inflated sense of yourself, right? You think you're this, that, whatever. And then you come in and you roll with some kid who ties you up into a pretzel. Reality comes and smacks you in the face. And you're like, whoa, maybe I need to tone it down a little bit, right? But on the other end, it does the other thing for people that sometimes really lack a lot of confidence. And honestly, this was probably more me because I was a chubby, fat kid growing up. And so when I was I had this through training and all this other stuff, I had built this vehicle, this engine, this body that could do these things, but I didn't realize what I could do. And so what would happen is I would throw myself into these challenging situations. And obviously sometimes it just didn't work. But when I kept training hard, kept pushing it, I started to realize that my abilities were far more than what I actually thought. And so then you kind of, again, we meet reality. So if you're inflated, it's going to bring you down a little bit. But sometimes if you're just not giving yourself enough credit by putting yourself in the reality, the challenge, you actually find out there's more in you than you think there is. And so I think it's a beautiful thing because it can help people out on both ends of the spectrum. And it can kind of steep your ego in a sense of realism where, you don't get away from it. You can constantly, because really the big problem is if you get this construction of who you think you are, like, let's say you think you're supposed to beat, X, Y, and Z people in your gym because you beat them yesterday. And then you come in the next day and then they beat you. Then you get frustrated because you're like, well, I beat them yesterday. I'm always supposed to beat them. So I think that jiu-jitsu and a lot of the combat sports kind of help you do this thing where you never get ahead of yourself. You're always like, look, every challenging situation is always going to be different. And instead of like just sort of assuming that you're supposed to do this, that whatever, you're always kind of present in the moment with what's going on, so you don't get ahead of yourself and so you don't get that frustration from those sorts of things.
Let me ask you that's a great answer. Let me ask you, I wrote a couple notes there. Let me ask you a couple questions that are fun questions that you may or may not ever answer on the air. What's the toughest belt to coach?
Toughest belt to coach?
Factoring in everything, ego, where they're at in the game.
I would say probably it's one of the like because again, here's what happens: the higher you go, the more you realize you don't know stuff, right? I would say probably the hardest belt to coach sometimes, I would say, is either white or blue. White is hard because there's just so much you want to give them, and you're like, God, I want to make you so much better, but like, for a white belt to become receptive to the information, they first have to make the mistake. It's almost like plowing the field before you plant the seed, right? Like, I can tell you everything you need to know, but until you go make the mistakes, you're not going to be receptive for the information. So first you got to fall flat on your face. Then I give you the seed. Boom. Now we'll grow something. But blue belts can be problematic because sometimes blue belts, they get that first little, they're now a colored belt. They now think that they have something. And I'm like, hold on a second. You're still a beginner. You're just starting. That you've only been training for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. Like, slow your roll, just keep training. And so sometimes I see like where guys look at their blue belts and, they'll instantly become like, they'll start posting, Instagram posts and all this stuff, like, looking for sponsorships and stuff. Like, I'm like, okay, just train for a while. Like, I understand the culture that we have now is like the me, Instagram,
self-promotion,
bullshit culture. It's so gross. Like, and again, we all do it to some degree, but like some of it's just so ridiculous where it's like, it's not even I'm okay with self-promotion if you got something to give. What annoys me is you get people that like never done anything and then they're going to promote themselves. Like, you'll have the business guy. I get targeted for all the business and entrepreneur bullshit. And it's like, you'll have a guy that like, I'll look him up and sort of scan into him. And it's like, he's never actually ran a business. His business is teaching you how to run a successful business. So it's like, basically, you're just a professional bullshitter. You've never done it. It's like me learning from a guy that's not an actual black belt, but he's watched some videos that a black belt did, and he's going to teach me how to do them. It's like, fuck off. Like, I want to learn from someone that's been in the trenches. And so, like, to me, it's like, just slow your roll. Put some time in to train before you get there. And usually at purple belt, you're just in the situation where you're like, it kind of like resets everything, and you realize you're in some deep waters. So.
That's a great answer. That's the term. I joked the other day. I posted. You remember when Sigourney Weaver's running off the alien ship before it blows up, and I posted my reaction when people call me to T&E stuff or sponsor. I'm running off. It's like I'm running off the ship with the cat, and I got the gun, and I'm like, I gotta get out of here. At every event, it's like, hey man, I'd love to try that AK, or I'd love to test that for you, or I'd love to do this. I'm like, oh God, here we go. So toughest belt. Yeah, exactly. So toughest belt. That's a great answer. What do you feel about the movies now using mixed martial arts? I don't want to get into the legit or not argument, but like through the years, Seagal, Jean-Claude, how does that all rub you, and how do you feel it is now with the culmination of Keanu and John Wick?
I think it's cool. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, like, back in my childhood, I grew up watching Bloodsport and Karate Kid and stuff like that. And so, they were just taking the popular martial arts at the time, and they just basically movie-fied them, and this has happened over and over again, where you basically just take whatever's, popular at the time, and you're like, all right, let's make it kind of flashy and turn it into a movie. And so I think it's cool. I think what's interesting to me is because like guys like Keanu, from what I understand, he actually trains.
Oh, he's a practitioner. Sure.
Like, he rolls though. Like, so it's like, because there's one thing. It's like, if you go in and you like, I don't know. I mean, it's the maybe it's like the masochist in me, but like, I feel like if you're gonna go get a belt in jiu-jitsu, you need to suffer a little bit. Like, I think suffering's part of it, right? Like, to me, it's like what makes the the things that we get out of some of these, even like lifting weights, part of the fun is you go put yourself through some grueling workout, and then, over and over again, and eventually you look in the mirror and you're like, oh man, look at that. Like the muscle grew a little bit. And it makes that suffering sort of worth something. It makes it much more, it makes it much more of a rich experience. But I've seen where, some of the celebrities will like get belts, and they just give them belts. Like, here you go. Like, I don't know to what degree they do things, but it seems like they're just getting belts. So I think Keanu actually rolls, and I think that's kind of a cool thing. But as far as it being in the movies, it's completely normal, and it's fine with me. So
yeah, I think it's cool. I can remember what was it, Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon throwing a triangle.
Yeah, he did the triangle show.
Yeah, so I can remember a lot of that stuff, and I think it's cool. Like Keanu, the big hubbub was made about Keanu shooting, and he trained with Taron and the whole bit, and that was legit. Of course, there's always a little gamesmanship. Like on Taron's ranch, the targets are like 3 feet away. You know what I mean? So he's just flinging. He's fast as fuck. He's proficient. There's no doubt he's trained on the weapon system. There's no doubt that he knows it. And he probably does it better than I do. But at the same time, of course, there's a little gamesmanship. I think with the whole, whether it's belting or saying they're legit because they hit some steel, I think there's a little bit of truth to the celebrity, if you will. But I think part of that is, and I think you do this, if somebody's not a tried and true competitor, you look for good people too, at the core that you're promoting and that promote the sport. You want good folks. And Coach Casey Alstead always says that. He goes, I want to promote good people too. I want to have good folks in my gym representing me and representing my brand. It's not to say they don't have the proficiency, but, there's other factors that come into play. Not everybody, like we said, can crawl in the ring and box still. There's different factors.
Absolutely.
You're not necessarily promoting them to black belt, and they're not out there teaching or professing, but they're good enough that you say, this is a great representative of my gym, and I want to acknowledge that too.
Yeah.
And I think Keanu does that because I do think he's a practitioner. I think he is someone that's going out there and doing it.
It's funny you were saying, you were talking about like, I guess like the, because you have to kind of doctor it up a little bit to make it exciting looking, because imagine looking at like a jiu-jitsu roll on a movie. I mean, the people are just going to walk out and leave. They're like, I have no clue what's going on, and this is so boring. So you obviously got to doctor it up a little bit. I honestly, it's funny, if I watch a movie like that's like based on a historical event, I'm a big history geek, so I'll be harder on like the history like inaccuracies than I will be with like, say, if I'm watching an MMA movie, because like with MMA or jiu-jitsu or any of that stuff, like they have to doctor it up a little bit, but a lot of times like history is a lot of times really exciting if you just leave it alone. But I feel like with the fighting and stuff, you have to touch it up a little bit so it actually makes it appealing to the eye.
We call it, there's a term we use in the shooting world, we call it staging, because obviously you have things like live ammunition that can create terminal problems, right? So you have to like we joke with people all the time that'll be like, that's not the way you would take a hallway. We're like, yeah, dude, we get it. It's a photo shoot. It's a video shoot. We're trying to just, get the shot at the same time, still maintain the integrity of, the move or whatever it is, or slicing the pie or cutting the, how we would do that. We get it. You know what I mean? And that's what leads to some of those kind of, you don't want to create a McDojo life moment, but at the same time, you're still trying to maintain, some semblance of getting the point across. That's why sometimes when you're teaching, you'll go so slow and monotonous. You'll do like a Gracie slice or something. You'll teach it and you'll be like, yeah, here's my right hand. I'm going to put it here, or here's my left. You're almost overdoing it. You're like, well, that would never work at full speed. Well, no shit. It's not going to work at full speed.
Right.
Like when Keanu does a move and he'll put somebody in a headlock and then shoot them. Yeah, he does a very slow, deliberate roll into that, but it's a movie. It's a movie.
It's a representation of something. It's not the actual thing.
It's a movie. Let me ask you a question. I want to get to some of the juicy stuff, Nick, that we can have some fun with.
Juicy stuff.
Yeah. So, how ridiculous is Seagal?
Oh man. It's funny. I wasn't even a big Seagal fan when I was a kid growing up. I was a John Claude fan. John Claude was like my man crush as a kid growing up.
JCVD. Of course.
Yeah, that's right. As far as Seagal goes, the only thing I really saw about him was, I remember I haven't owned a TV for a long time, so I was over at a friend's house and he had on this. We were flipping their channels, and there was a show that he was on, like where he was like a honorary deputy or something, and then he was telling people that he told Anderson Silva how to do a front kick. I'm like, this guy's such a clown, you know. And then, but if you go look back at it, there's a great video from way back in the day, like maybe the 70s or 80s, where he's doing like a chi movement sort of thing. Like it was on some sort of like TV show from way back in the day. And it's just like, I mean, he was kooky back then. So I don't expect anything to change now.
You know, I think Rogan had the best explanation of it. So I got to credit Joe. He said, Seagal's legit. It's the martial art that's not legit. He's, you know, he said he's a legit practitioner. He's got all the belts, the medals, nothing's fudged there. But the problem is the martial art just isn't there. You know, the guys who, I guess in Aikido, the feeders are more the talented ones in many ways.
Okay.
And it's more of it's an art form, you know, and I guess what people fail to realize, some martial arts are more an art. And I think, I've had it explained to me by multiple people. They say where the art starts to meet reality is somewhere in between Taekwondo, Jeet Kune Do, and you know, some of the different martial arts that start to involve actual striking and hitting and actual techniques. Now, he said over the years, what's made Seagal great is he's incorporated more of the physical. You know, he's gotten more physical. So Seagal, for me, I think it's good movie karate, if you will, for lack of better words. It's good movie. You know, it plays well in movies, but I think, he's gone off the deep end with, you know, saying, they refer to me as sensei, and, you know, I taught Anderson Silva how to kick, and, you know, he's taking a little bit of liberty with some of that stuff. And I think part of that goes to believe in your own hype. You know, I think over the years, obviously, he's believed a lot of his own hype, and he is a big, imposing guy. Which leads me to our favorite of all time, Frank Dukes. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Frank a couple times and chatting with him.
Lucky.
Oh, my God. Listen, so you're familiar with Tony Sentman out of Real World Tactical?
I'm familiar with who he is, yeah.
Yeah, so Tony and I are best friends. So Tony and I were at an event, and I'm going to tell this story because you'll appreciate it. Tony and I were at, I believe, the Arnold Classic. And it's like, you know, Couture's there. It's a crazy table. It's one of those tables that you look at, Nick, from a distance, and you're like, "Am I seeing this right?"
Yeah.
You know, it's like Couture, Frank Dukes, I believe a couple of former Hell's Angels I don't want to name, and a couple of guys, and that I know.
Motley crew right
yeah,
there.
And there's a couple of bodybuilders there. I think Branch was there, a few guys. So I'm looking and I'm like, holy shit, Tony. And he's wearing the glasses. You can't mistake him. Oh, that's Frank Dukes. So, like, we mush, like, Couture in the face and, like, this. And we're like, we got to go over and meet him. So we meet him. And, of course, Tony, I can't help himself. He's like, you know, I never see him starstruck. He's like, holy shit, I got to ask him. I'm like, what the fuck are you going to ask him? He goes, is the dim mock real? And, of course, Frank, you know, he can't help himself. And this is where the hype kind of meets reality. He's like, well, you know, some stuff was embellished in the movie. I'm like, well, like, wait a minute. Can you, like, break a brick 7 bricks down, you know, if we, like, set it up, like, right now? Like, we're in a bar room. And I'm like.
That's what we really want to know.
Yeah, I'm like, can this happen? And, you know, it's one of those crazy moments in life that you're just like, this is surreal. So we meet him, we take the picture, we do the, you know, the customary thing, and life goes on. I run into him a little bit later at an event, and I'm with, you know, Bruce Cardenas from Quest, a few people, and I'm like, holy shit, that's Frank again. I'm like, I got to bump into him because I'm in Vegas now, and he lives in Vegas. So I tell him where I'm working, and he's like, oh, you're the firearms guy. So now he kind of has a rough idea who I am. And I'm like, okay, yeah. I'm like, he goes, I got to get with you. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And he's like talking about how he's teaching on military bases and he's doing all this shit, this black bag type stuff. He starts going down that road. So he says to me, I have a way. I'm not fabricating a single fucking word of this. And if he was on here, I'd ask him and he would talk about it. So Frank, you're invited. He says, I have a way to detach your medulla oblongata to make you draw a firearm 2 seconds faster than you draw it.
What?
So I'm like, now I'm with one of my bosses. I'm like, did I just hear? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, so yeah. He goes, you'll detach your brain stem, and you'll have the ability to draw a firearm 2 seconds faster. So if I'm a 1 second draw, does that make me -1 when I'm done?
Yeah.
I'm like, how does this work in my head? He goes, it's a technique. And I'd have to show you the technique, and we would have to be on a range. Now, in my head, my mind is blown. And it's a it's one of those things that you just kind of got to nod because it's Frank Dukes, right? Like, what are you
Sure,
going to
of
do?
course.
I mean, do you call him? I mean, what do you do? Is he the last of that breed of, like, I got my black belt on the back of a matchbook, and the industry just kind of has to accept him for what he is, because I mean, I'm going to tell you straight out, I don't believe that his whatever the fuck it is, Duke's Ryu, is legit for 1
No.
second. I don't believe any of that. I'm in that camp, and I'd say it to his fucking face if he was sitting here.
No.
Is he the last of that breed?
Man, I thought about this before because obviously I grew up watching this, and I thought, man, this is blood sport, and I wanted to learn how to do this.
500-0.
Dude, I went into Taekwondo practice when I was a kid, and I remember I got my yellow belt, so it's like the second belt. Did my first test, and then I was asking, I was like, when do I get to spar? And they were like, well, you don't get to spar till your blue belt. And I don't know which one the blue belt is, but it was kind of far up. So I was like, I got bored because I was like, well, how am I going to fight in the kumite if I can't spar? Or I have to get ready. I'm like 7 years old this time or some shit. But I don't think he's the last, because here's the thing. I think there will be less of them, and maybe probably not so, because he blew up, obviously.
There's nowhere to hide. Yeah. There's nowhere to hide anymore.
But at the same time, man, like, if people want to believe in something, they'll just believe in it. It doesn't matter. I mean, like, you still have, like, tricksters out there doing stuff, and they command the presence of a whole horde of people because those people want to believe in that thing that they're doing. I mean, you see these people who, like, they get sweaty and go into convulsions after someone touches them in the back of the ear. They believe in it. They even have them measured up to things to measure their vitals, and it does have an impact on them mentally. They've embraced this thing so much that they're going through this whole experience. So I think that regardless, you probably won't have anything on the level that Frank Dukes had. But I think that you'll still have people out there doing stuff where, making extra content from McDojo life, as time goes on.
and I'm going to defend poor Frank for a second. We'll both defend him because I know we both came up in that blood sport era. I think Frank was a product of Hollywood, and I think along the way, he was They kind of Hollywood things up. There's staging, and then there's Hollywooding things up. And I think Frank had this script, and he had this idea. I think he practiced a little bit of martial arts, but along the way, he kind of created this almost like his life was a Hollywood script. And he's just trying to survive in the business, if you will, Nick. You know what I mean? He's trying to get by in the business and make his living. And we all applaud him for that. He's done more for the sport than most people will in 10 lifetimes, in the sense that everybody put blood sport up on a pedestal. Right. And we applaud him for that. He was the original. He brought a lot of awareness to the sport. But the reality is, okay, when you look at it, it's a fucking movie. And I think along the way, Hollywood met real life, and he would do these interviews, and he would talk about body doubles and working for the CIA, and my record's been expunged. Now, listen, Nick, you may have been on one side of the defense community. I've been on the other. I know enough high-level people, and I've been in the room with enough people, enough ghosts, if you will. I know people that it's not their real name on the internet. I know Navy SEALs that have fake identities that are. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I'm sure you have, meeting some of them on the mats. That shit don't exist. There's nothing that's super classified out there that there's, he's like using body doubles and everything else. And it's all in it. Let me tell you something. He's old enough now that it's all been declassified. So there's nothing. And, look, I'm not trying to trample. He did wonders for the sport, but he was part of that generation that he got his belt on the back of a fucking comic book. I mean,
there were those guys like Count Dante and all these other dudes that used to sell the secrets of ninjutsu on the back of, like comic books and stuff like that. I mean, it is what it is. Martial arts used to be this weird thing. I mean, hell, people like, this is kind of, we're going back to what I talked about earlier. Okay, so you have this guy that really didn't do anything in this martial arts, but basically faked it, right? And then did all this stuff. You've got the same people now on, social media telling you about other subjects. Again, like we were talking about business. That guy, you could literally just sort of take it there. Say, okay, well, this guy says he's got this business or he's doing all this, making this money, whatever. You can drop this Bentley too if you buy his course.
Super secret serum.
Yeah, some of it's bullshit. So it's this self-aggrandizement, and it's like people not actually investing themselves into the damn thing and actually getting out. And then like it's the monomyth from Joseph Campbell. You go out and do something, and then you come back around after you've done something, and you say, "Hey, guess what? I found a few things out along the way. Let me share it with you." Not, well, I'm actually on my road right now, but I'm gonna say like I've been there, and then come back and actually tell you, about what I was doing. So
yeah, I mean, Tony Robbins became a guru's guru, right? He became, he studied under Jim Rohn. He went on to become a guru, and along the way, the guru business became a business, and he became successful at being a guru. And he studied it so much that he had visited the Dalai Lama. He became a subject matter expert at being a guru. I think to some extent, Frank, along the way, whether it was in the early '80s to late '80s, he became really good at integrating martial arts into movies. Now, along the way, if the motherfucker believed his own hype and started to believe that, he could throw a kick in 0.1 seconds, and, you have plenty of guys out there like Superfoot that'll totally say, yeah, it's fucking bullshit. Bill will say that. It's like, I know. He's like, I've done it, and it's just one of those things. You have to kind of accept it for what it is, and along the way of any, mixed martial arts journey or anybody's journey, you have to say, look, there's certain stuff that's a little bit of sorcery, and we accept it for what it is. Frank, we get a soft spot for Frank, and we should. We should have a soft spot for him. He integrated. Yeah, I mean, I think the pink man gets a little hard on him, and certain people out there, they're rough on him. There's a certain element of bullshit, but the reality is he put it into movies that captivated us. It's kind of like, do we really believe Tom Cruise can fly an F-16? No. I mean, of course he can't. He's not Maverick at the end of the day.
Well, of course, but I mean, I guess the problem with it is that like on the end of the movie, it was like, Jean-Claude sitting on the plane and he bows, and all of a sudden it's like, Frank Dukes knocked this guy out. He won this many matches, and then the guy still holds true to it. If the guy had said like, look, I'm a martial arts enthusiast and I can make it into movies, kind of cool. Like, I would be down with that. But it's just like all the screwed up, like the silly stuff that he talks about on the other side. That's where you kind of go, come on, man.
I liken it to this, Nick, and let's chalk it up as this for everybody who watches movies out there, because I love movies. It's believing your own hype. I think towards the end of that movie, he said, well, we should put my record up there, and my record. And like, as well as I do, there's no way to even tabulate half that stuff they had up there. The speed of his kicks, his kick was clocked at 80 miles an hour. I mean, really?
Yeah.
And he said they did it through cameras, and there was no way to tabulate it then. It just comes down to believe in your own hype. If he had done it for what it was, and he said, yeah, they Hollywooded it up, whatever. He went on to have a role in The Quest in terms of I believe he was choreographed some of the movie The Quest and some other movies, and it is what it is. I mean, everybody kind of does it. Chuck Wepner sued Stallone for the Rocky. Stole a little bit of his story. That's the reality. And at the end of the day, Stallone is not Chuck Wepner. He's not going 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali. It's just not happening. And and that's kind of where I wish Frank would have at some point said, yeah, it's Hollywood, and they kind of muck it up a little bit, And the reality is, we were trying to sell a movie. So yes, I did a couple interviews that I made it sound a certain way to dress it up, and everybody would have been like, that's cool, it's Frank, let it be. But I think along the way, he believed a little of his hype, and that's what that's the wormhole that Seagal falls into in certain people. And I think you run into that in all things. People, I think, believe because maybe they competed in a little, SBG Gorilla Cup that they competed in the UFC. Well, no, they're not the same things. You didn't compete in the UFC. You competed in a local match at the VFW. Let's tone it down a click. And I think it's all putting it in perspective, and that's what I try to tell folks, but I think along the way, some of these guys Hollywood it up and they go a step too far. Do you, how do you approach that? Because, my good friend Ruben Alvarez, he's called out some fake black belts. Have you ever kind of come across that in your journey where you're like, hey man, listen, this isn't the way it is,
There was only one time. There was a guy in my city where this is when I was a brown belt. So I just started teaching at my gym, and the torch got passed to me. That was the head coach, and I was a brown belt at the time. And there was a guy in the city who had a radio commercial going, and he was teaching out of a local traditional Globo style gym, regular weightlifting gym, and he on the radio commercial, he was talking about mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, whatever. But he said that on the thing and all the advertisement information that he was putting out online and on the radio was saying that he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And so I got really angry about that because I'm a brown belt. I was like, man, you're not a black belt. There were only a couple black belts in the city. So at the time, there was a really popular forum that a lot of the local fighters, a lot of the MMA guys that were in the area, they got on. And so I got on there and I blasted the dude. I was like, these are the only black belts in the city. I named them. Some of these guys weren't even, me, obviously my guys, like they were just guys that were their black belts in the city. And I was like, this guy's a fraud, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then he sent me a call and, apologized or whatever. But where this really came to a head was we had some fighters fight at this local show. And one of his, we fought a couple of his guys, but one of his guys, they told everyone that they were going to do a drug test. And so a bunch of guys left, because they were like, well, we don't want to get fined or whatever. And so they had to rearrange the fight card a bit. Well, we had a guy who was going to fight at 145. So he was a 145, or he was back up to 155. So it wasn't a big deal. But they had a guy on the card that was from this guy's team, the fake black belts team, that was I think 165 or something. And so the promoter asked if we would put them together. And I sort of just nodded. I was like, it's fine. And when they fought, our 145er, he ended up, beating the guy down so much that he had to have plates put in his face after it was done. And so, I told the guy afterwards, I'm like, this is why you don't need to be teaching. You're not a real martial artist. You haven't trained. You're an out of shape, fat white guy that's trying to teach people how to do martial arts. It's ridiculous. And you shouldn't be doing this because you're going to get someone hurt. And so that was, that was a little altercation. So that was the only time where I ever had any altercation with someone being a faker. Most of the fakers just they're not here.
You got to love the accountability, though, and I think everybody wants that little bit of accountability strain. I'm all for, I prescribe to the theory, never take anything away from anybody. If somebody awarded them something or they graduated something or they've been through something, give them that. They're owed that.
Sure.
As long as it's verified, they're owed that. Don't take it from them. But at the same time, there has to be that accountability strain, and that's one of the things that I like about jiu-jitsu is there's that accountability strain, and I think that it keeps a purity about it, and I think that's always been one of the beauties of getting involved in the sport, because you could trace everything back pretty easily. Like we started talking, I said to you, hey, I trained at SBG, and I trained with Coach Casey Halstead now at 10P. Right away, the lineage like that. Mm-hmm. You're like, yep, I get it. Okay, I know. Okay. Links back to Jean-Jacques, links back to Conor McGregor, SBG, straight through that system. You get it, to Thornton, and it's simple. And you can say your coaches, and you're like, okay, that's legit. I can verify that if I need to. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, there's a self-regulating nature to it because we put so much time and effort into the belts and the ranks that we get. When someone steps out of line and fakes it, there's a lot of emotion there because a lot of people get upset because, like I said, I was a brown belt. I hadn't even got my black belt yet. And I was still about, 8 months away from it. And so this guy stepping out of line saying that he's done something that, even me after, I guess it was probably seven something years hadn't done. I was like, how dare you, and so, it's kind of a cool thing that jiu-jitsu has, a self-regulating nature to it.
Now let me ask you this, because we're getting long in this. And I know you got to get going. Let me ask you this. If you didn't train at your own school, what schools do you look at and admire that you like, geez, I wish I could train there more. Geez, I really like what they're doing, or that's a really cool system?
Man, I don't know. For me, it would come down to it. I have to go for me, it really comes down to the group of people that are in there. The techniques and the competitions and stuff, for me, everybody's different, but for me, when it comes down to it, is I want to go into a place where I like being around the people, because if I don't want to be around the people that I'm surrounded by, I'm not going to want to be there. Regardless of how good the training is, regardless of how good the techniques are or whatever. So for me, it would have to come down to school, because I've seen gyms that were part of affiliations where I didn't really like them. I was like, this experience that I had wasn't very good. And then I've been into these little hole in the wall gyms where the training was fine and the people were amazing. So really it would come down to me going to those places. I would say one of the things that interests me is I see some of the 10th Planet stuff, and from working with some of the 10th Planet guys, like my buddy Brandon McGaffron, it's interested me. So if I had to just choose based off of whatever, I would dabble in that because I'm more of I like no-gi a little bit more, and sort of the systematizing of some of the drills and stuff that they do. I find it interesting. So, maybe that, but if it was just on the table, maybe that, or like I said, I really, I don't know anything about their culture, but obviously they're doing something good out there in San Diego. But Atos and those guys are really, really tough. So it would be interesting to turn out there.
Yeah, I one of the draws for me coming to Vegas was I was like, it was a no-brainer. I was like, I'm going to 10th Planet. I mean, that open mat on Sunday is fucking savage. I mean, you walk in there, it's amazing up in Henderson. I mean, there could be Ben Saunders on the mat on any given day. There could be, it's just a whole host of guys that you're like, holy shit, when you look around. It's like a murderer's row. That's awesome. That you would throw anybody up against. So it's phenomenal. And when we have events in town, whether it's the IFBB tournaments or you have anything in town, you just don't know who what you're going to walk into, and it's amazing. So that's something. I mean, I definitely, I looked at that from a distance when I was moving here, and I was like, this is going to be fucking awesome. Coming from an SBG to that, going from Montana to here, my first open mat roll was with Vinny Magahalis. So I was like, with Vinny, and I'm still
tough roll. Yeah,
so I was like, I remember calling Ruben, and I'd be like, I just rolled with this guy, and he was like, holy shit. He was like, you just roll one of the top 20 guys on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, that's amazing. So having that opportunity, the stakes just go up. So, for me from a distance, it was 10P, of course. I would say definitely having the opportunity to travel a little bit with Ruben and hit some different schools through the years. Henzo Gracie, definitely up in New York will be one on my list for sure. I'd love to go in there and get my ass kicked for a little while. That would be a lot of fun.
There's so many. I mean, there's so many gyms. That's right. It's such a hard question because there's so many good gyms out there that trying to pick one. I mean, you got Henzo's, Marcelo Garcia up in New York. You go down to Florida. I mean, Florida's just riddled with good gyms. So is California. I mean, it's just it's so hard.
How there's two more big questions I want to get to. Cool. How important is it to you, at what belt stage do you say to some of your guys, and this goes on in every gym, it's important, and we do this with shooting, what belt do you say, listen, man, you need to get on a plane and you need to go train in this area for a week. Go hit these 3 gyms. And you kind of see where you're at and kind of, because you're in Kentucky, so I'm sure you've done that with guys where you're like, hey, it's time. Go and do this tournament. At what stage do you say that to even, the biggest house cat in your gym?
Yeah, if it's some of the guys that are a little bit tougher, we'll go on trips from time to time, or I'll bring people out, to the gym. We brought out a couple guys for not really seminars, but mainly just for me, it's exposure to other stuff for the guys, letting them roll with really, really high level people just to know what that's like. And I don't even charge them for it. I'm just like, look, just come out and train and have a good time with these guys. But I would say probably maybe late blue or purple is good.
It's a good time.
Because purple's where you're really starting to to me, when you're a purple belt, you should be kind of coming into your own, figuring out what your style is and figuring out who you are. And that happens at a late blue belt as well, because you start to get really scrappy at late blue. And then anytime after that, it's always good to do this. I've always been a fan of training trips, and then just, anytime I'm traveling, I always pack a gi or rash guard with me, just to make sure I can get some training and just to, experience other people's styles and have a good time as well.
Yeah. And one other big question is, and you've answered it 100 times, I'm sure, in your online, but for everybody out there, what advice do you give to someone looking to sign up to a gym or walking in a gym for the first time? What would be your biggest, tidbit of information or advice?
Usually whenever someone's doing something for the first time, it doesn't matter what it is. We always build something up. We do this with people, right? We see people and we get this fixation as to who we think this person is. A lot of guys do this in relationships, right? And then we see this woman and we try to we get an idea of who we think this woman is based off of
we're in love
information we have. Right, exactly. And then you get to meet them and you're like, oh, so this is completely different than what I was expecting, right? And a lot of times it's like that with MMA training or jiu-jitsu training. People get really psyched out because maybe they watch a movie, maybe they watch some video of some really crazy highlight of the highest level people in jiu-jitsu in the world. And then they're thinking that that's what it's going to be like on day one. And then they come into the gym and they're just learning how to do shrimps. And they're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Like, maybe I can do this. And so the big thing I would say is with people, like if you're thinking about doing it, or really anything else, but if you're thinking about doing jiu-jitsu, sort of get rid of any sort of expectations that you have or any sort of ideas as to what you think it's going to be like, and just get in there and do it, because a lot of times they're not going to match up, because until you do it, you really don't know what it's going to be like. And a lot of times that expectation or that fear of what it could be like, a lot of times holds people back. I had one student who, it took him 6 months. He would literally drive his car up, leave, drive his car up and leave to the gym, because he would go up and he would almost walk in and then he would lose his heart and leave. He finally steps in the gym 6 months later, starts training, loses 100 pounds because he's like 270 coming in, fought 170, won a bunch of tournaments and stuff like that, and it radically changed him. And he's been with me now. He's almost a black belt, and so been with me for a long time. And again, it was just because of his preconceived notion as to what he thought it was. But that, again, when he walked in, he even said it. He was like, "This isn't at all what I thought it was going to be like." So make just sure you do it without sort of thinking about it too much.
I think that's a phenomenal answer, and I actually took a couple notes on it. You said it the best. I think you have to find a gym that's like your home, and I've had a lot of people say that to me through the years. You have to feel at home, and I think it's important for the coaches to spend a little personal time, and get to know their students in some ways. And by personal, I don't mean like you have to, hang out with them outside of the mat or things like that, but at least spend some time sitting with them, chatting with them. Maybe instead of rolling, say, hey man, let's just sit, let's just bullshit for this 5 minutes. What do you do outside of here? And get to know them on a personal level. I think that goes a long way, especially for the non-competitive guys. Speaking as a guy who's kind of a non-compete, kind of just 5 minutes to get to know me, because I always say this, Nick, and I'll leave you with this thought. It doesn't matter who walks in your gym. Everybody's somebody. Just ask them. They'll tell you. Everybody's someone. And I say that to all my crew all the time. And, I tell them, I say, look, be careful who walks up to the booth. Be careful who comes on the range. They're all somebody in their own world. It might be their first time shooting a gun. It might be their first time taking a class. It might be their first time on an AR or AK platform. But in their own world, they're somebody. It's like if I had you out to the range, you might not be the most proficient in an AR platform or an AK platform or a Glock. Yeah. But, you're an SME in your own right. And you want to be respected and treated as such. And sometimes I had to explain that one time. I was sitting, I'm a few years into this journey, and I said this to a kid who was, 8 months in, and he's doing 4 weeks, 3 practices a day, and he wants to be somebody. He's going to be a UFC guy. I said, man, I might be small potatoes out here, but in, my world, I like to think, I've done a few things. I've traveled. I've seen some shit. I've been around the campus a long time. And here I might not be this, big swinging dick, and that's great too. And you'll learn that everybody has a journey, and everybody has something that they've been through, and everybody's done something. Whether they're a white belt, a blue belt, or a purple belt, they may have done, 4 years overseas. They may have been 10 years in law enforcement. Respect that they're trying something new, and respect that they're trying to give the time to that new task. And their time should be respected, because it's the most precious commodity, and you can't get it back, and they're willing to give it to you. And that's really important to respect. And I think some black belts or some schools make the mistake of being like, rough and tumble with those types of guys. And I usually say, you have to understand, they're willing to give you that 1 hour. They're willing to give you their money and allow you to teach them. Treat that very carefully and respect that. And I think that's super important. I loved having you on, man. You've been a little bit of a mentor to me from afar, and I've always watched your stuff. And I used to sit, in Montana with Leah, and we used to watch your stuff, and I love the shit out of what you're doing. And I think that mentorship from afar is really important, Nick. And I think you're onto a good thing, and you're doing great things. And I think you should stay in that niche of kind of coaching from a distance. I think you got something there. And
well, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
man.
I think it's huge, man. And if you're ever out in Vegas, I'll say this right on air in front of everybody. If you're ever out in Vegas and you don't need me, you're a black belt, you can walk in any gym you want. but I'd love to have you out to any of the mats I'm on and introduce you around to the guys. That'd be phenomenal. And anytime you're out here, you know, you don't need me to give you the invite. I'd love to get you out and introduce you around like you're my buddy or something.
Yeah.
You know.
No, man. Yeah. If I'm out in Vegas, I'll definitely hit you up and we'll get together.
For sure. I'll give you the last word. Kind of tell everybody where they can find you and where they can locate you and your Instagram and YouTube and all that fancy shit and anything you want to plug.
Yeah, so I don't really have too much to plug, but if you guys want to, if you've enjoyed the conversation, if you want to find out more about what I've got going on, you can just put in ChewJitsu, ChewJitsu, into YouTube. That's kind of my main platform that most people know me from. I'm on Instagram and all that other stuff, and you can check out my website if you just want to go deeper, ChewJitsu.net. But just put in ChewJitsu and go on YouTube, and you can go down and binge watch some of the videos and figure out what I'm about and just kind of go from there.
If somebody wants to submit you one of those famous questions, where do they send it?
Probably there's a couple different ways. One is through email. I've got an email form on my website. And then I'll take questions through Instagram and stuff like that. My one thing is, if you do put in a question, make sure that there are like sentence breaks. Like it's not just one big long monster paragraph. Like break up the sentences up a little bit for me so it's easy for me to read. Like sometimes I'll get like a 1,000-word message and there's not like a break or a space or anything. It just all run on. So just break it up a little bit for me and I'd be more than happy to try to help.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate the shit out of you. And guys, slide into the DM appropriately. This is a handsome man. Don't get out of line. Make sure you take your time to answer his question, to submit your question appropriately. You know, like he said, sentence breaks, all that. And, you know, I just, again, I want to say thank you so much. And you have my number. Anytime you want to look me up, don't hesitate. I'll be in Vegas. I don't make it to Kentucky that often, but I might have to make a special trip to hit.
I'll probably end up coming out to you before you come out to me.
That's
man.
probably
that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I loved having you, man. You're an open guest. Anytime you want to come on, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to talk to you more about guns and shooting and self-defense and go longer, but we've gone an hour and a half, so let's draw the line here. We're going to sign out. Q, kick us out.